Hello and welcome to Scilence, a podcast where women get really honest about surviving and thriving in what often feels like a man's world. My guests are Wonder Women from the fields of science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or STEM, where inclusivity and diversity can be a real problem. I know this only too well as a female Southeast Asian mechanical engineer. I was kind of a minority within a minority back then. I'm Dr. Shanice O'Mara, an engineer turned broadcaster. Throughout my career, I've worked on and reported on some cutting-edge technology and innovation. And through my television work, I've met some incredibly inspiring women from a diverse range of STEM fields. Talking to these exceptional ladies has often left me feeling empowered, hopeful, and excited about life. I believe Scilence will enrich you too. Every week, a woman in STEM shares her unique experiences with absolutely no pressure in having to promote her accomplishments or guard her impressive reputation, because I've come to realize that everyone is just way more open and relaxed when they're anonymous. So I deliberately disguise my guest voices so that we're just connecting as human beings rather than human doings. It's my hope that you really relate to what we chat about today. If so, please do subscribe to Scilence and maybe even rate and review the show. I'd love to have your feedback. This week, my guest is in the field of clean tech. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, so what is clean tech?
So clean tech is a description for two words that come together. Clean, that comes from the clean energy word, and tech is technology. So when you work on technologies that affect the clean energy word, that's clean tech.
Right. And what kind of things need clean tech?
Basically, if we think about the energy that we consume every day for our basic activities, turning the light on, turning the oven on, and so on, that is powered by some energy that is generated somewhere else. And ideally, we would want our world to be cleaner. We would want to produce less emissions. So if we increase the generation of clean energy using technologies, that's where clean tech could become a very valuable field.
Ah, okay. So when you talk about clean tech, you're talking about it from an energy consumption point of view.
Energy generation, energy storage, and energy consumption.
Ah, okay. Why did you go into that field? What was driving you?
So I'll be honest with you. The journey wasn't really planned, but I was really driven by matching problems with solutions, and maybe in some places as well, be the person who invent a solution or try to solve a problem. And that's where I think I made a decision quite early on to get into STEM and acquire enough knowledge to have the tools to be able to do that.
Why? Because you wanted to solve a specific problem, and STEM was the way to get you there. So how old were you when you realized STEM was for you?
Quite early on. I was always interested in physics, mathematics, chemistry, engineering. From since I was a little girl, these were much more interesting topics to talk about. These were the topics that I was interested in, playing with, like having toys, like a bridge, building a bridge was my favorite activity with my dad when I was, 5 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite early on.
Yeah. For me, my dad has been my biggest inspiration because he's an engineer himself. And so I was raised in a household where problems were always being solved using, ingenious solutions. What kind of household did you grow up in?
So I am the only, so I have two brothers. I'm the only daughter, and I didn't have sisters. We all kind of grew up developing our own interests separately. My my brothers are not as interested in STEM as I am.
Oh, wow.
So
Huh.
maybe this is like one sign that actually STEM is not gender related.
Yeah, definitely. But have you always been the type of person that found STEM subjects easy?
Yes.
Okay, so you were naturally sort of gifted in those subjects anyway.
I think this really comes from my relationship with my dad and the type, because he's a mechanical engineer.
Ah, there you go. Yeah, snap.
And the conversation with him was always like really, really interesting, because his
Mm,
way of thinking and the conversation with him is about, if something doesn't work, let's fix it, let's make it work, let's think
yeah.
about, yeah. So I'm definitely inspired by my father, and that has affected me.
Mm, yeah. A lot of girls, feel like maths and physics isn't for them. What would you say to girls like that, given that it seems like you were naturally good at those subjects anyway?
Um, I would question their exposure to these subjects, because
Mm,
sometimes you feel you hear stories about like exposure where little girls early on decide that this is too hard for them, or this is not
yeah.
for them, just because
Mm,
their exposure was either limited, or they did not have enough, like a representative experience of what these topics actually are. And I think that maybe that's where we should question, like what experiences they had, and what exposure they had.
mm,
uh, because I think if we want really to look at how we can increase the number of women in STEM, we need to think about what attracts them, and what exposure they have, and whether they have enough exposure, whether the environment that we use to deliver STEM through is like sufficient. Is it enough? Is it interesting enough? Is it exciting enough? And I question all that.
yeah. I mean, you put it in a way that I've never really heard as succinctly before, which is that it's not about girls not being naturally good at STEM subjects. It's about how their interest is nurtured through those subjects. And I see time and time again young sort of teenagers experiencing the intimidation of subjects like maths and physics and kind of seeing them fall away from it. That whole leaky pipeline, um, really does exist. And so I guess what you're saying is let's look at how it's being taught.
Yeah, and if say for example, anything that new that we learn, especially like if it comes later on in our learning journey, we feel uncomfortable with. And I mean, I've had like you. I mean, I did a few degrees, even a PhD, which is like a long journey of learning, or academic
Mm,
learning. And even now, if I am about to learn something new, which I know nothing about and I was not exposed enough to, I feel uncomfortable. And I think this is
yeah.
natural. Maybe I think we start the exposure of STEM to little girls, and in some countries, even girls and boys are not exposed to enough STEM early on.
Yeah.
So the way their thinking is shaped, and the way they accept or feel comfortable with these topics, is less than others who had an earlier exposure where the experience was comfortable, nice, and it becomes like a natural learning experience.
Yeah. I mean, you're making me think back to my own journey in STEM subjects early on. And I must say, I found maths and physics and chemistry really, really difficult because I just couldn't relate to the subject matter. And I knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my father, but I was always self doubting because I just didn't get it when it came to the subjects I needed to get onto an engineering course.
Mhm.
Um, And now that's making me think, gosh, the way we're taught STEM subjects in school is actually the key. It's paramount to sustaining people's interest in the subjects. Um, how can we make it more fun, more approachable, less intimidating?
So, thank you for asking me this question. It's a really interesting question, and you know what? Let's think about, say, gaming and toys.
Yeah.
If you think about the toys that we give to girls as opposed to the toys that we give to boys,
Mm.
it's a learning experience. It's some level of exposure to STEM from the point that they start to interact with toys. And I did this experiment with a friend. We went to buy a gift toy for a friend who just had a baby. And I said, just look in that direction for 10 seconds and then look back at me and tell me what your impression was. He did that and came back and said, pink. And that is true. You find that the toys that are designed for girls, and I think this is changing. They are a lot about the bright color, less mechanical, more
Cuddly,
designed.
fluffy.
Yeah, more cuddly, fluffy. And you know what? This is a learning experience. This interaction on its own is teaching a human being how to interact with objects,
Yeah.
and later down that develops into an interest. And if we could start from that point where we develop interest of little girls and boys to to be around what's the desired outcome later, 20 years later, I think we might be able to see change.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about like the children of friends of mine whose little boys naturally gravitated towards like the construction sets and the diggers and the cars and all those mechanical objects. And I'm
Mhm.
actually wondering whether they gravitated towards them or whether they were just given them and so they found them interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved Lego when I was a kid. So, I mean, my dad was always giving me awesome cars and things because that's what he hoped he could play with when he was a kid and things. So I was given those boys' toys and just found them fascinating. So really, it's down to the parents, isn't it? It's down to the parents and teachers of what we expose our youngsters to.
Yeah, I loved fast cars.
Yeah,
I still love
yeah,
them. But yeah, when like someone from our friends or a family member would get me like say a Barbie house, I would use it as like a parking for my brother car.
yeah.
It's it was definitely not something that I at any point showed interest
Mm.
in.
It's funny because you kind of sound a little bit like a tomboy, considering that you went into STEM and you're the only girl in your family. But you don't come across, well, at least through your voice, as being a tomboy. How have you managed to balance your femininity with being in STEM?
Um, your interest in learning is one thing, and basically, in the class, in the family, I also like have a very feminine mother. She always also she taught me about the importance of always looking after how you look, and always like speaking with a nice voice, always being nice to people, always being very engaging. And that is part of the learning as well. It's not only focusing on STEM and ignoring the rest of the world.
Mm. Have you not found that by studying STEM, because it sounds like you've gone very far in your studies and academia, have you not found that often your STEM studies have clashed with those more softer skills?
Maybe like statistically, say when I started to go into, like, later in my career, when I started to go into meetings, and statistically there were less women in these meetings than men. But then your life is not only that meeting, right? It's like you are a
Right.
lot more of what happens outside that. So statistically, around the profession, yes, there definitely are less women, and the more I progress with my career, unfortunately, I see less and less women in meetings and in gatherings, and I hope that this will change. Because the mix is very important to achieve better results for everyone. When I go to an interview and I see a woman in the room, I feel more comfortable, and my interview is better. And it happened to me a few times already, uh, just because of seeing someone was similar in a way or another to you. Um, yeah.
Yeah. It is good to be around people that are like us, because we just feel more relatable. How has it been for you as a woman in STEM generally in your career? Like, have you had to develop any kinds of um, not coping mechanisms, but just like characteristics that are essential for surviving and thriving as a woman in STEM?
Um, so, um, so my daily job, I run a clean tech startup. So I am the CEO. I am the person who is, and in my team, I'm the only woman. So I think I developed some skills that are needed to run a business. Some of them are perceived as acceptable in the men world, less acceptable in the women world, just because there are less women doing these jobs, like being authoritative when you need to, being assertive when you need to, and so, for example, when I have to be in a meeting where I really want to be taken seriously, I was coached to use my voice differently, like to have my voice being coming out stronger, and try and control that, because that projects some confidence that I needed to prove that I know what I'm talking about.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You actually got coaching for that?
Yes. Uh,
Oh, wow.
yeah, because early on I was told that I had a voice of a little girl, and that is not good if I am asking investors for money, and if I wanted to prove to others that I am capable of running a business that is associated with some difficulties, and needed some type of people to be able to do that. So I got coached to do that, and it did work. And I'm sure that some other women have similar issues, or maybe they don't have these particular issues, but they would have others that they would be coached to
Yeah.
to basically get to the level that they needed to be able to do a certain type of job. And it's not a natural thing to have, but you get trained to do it, and you learn it.
Yeah, because it is very much about the way you carry yourself in the world, because academically you have excelled and proved your intelligence through your qualifications, but there's a next level of kind of accomplishment, which involves kind of how we view ourselves as human beings. And that really affects the way we carry ourselves in the world. Have you, sort of looking back on your career development, have you experienced those different skills that you've had to acquire?
Um, yeah, so your question is about basically the transition from the skills that I needed as an academic and the skills that I needed as a
In
business person.
Yeah, in the real world. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, definitely, it's an important, I guess, point to talk about, because first phase, when I decided that I did not want to become an academic, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur, I spoke the academics language, which is very
Yeah.
detailed, very accurate. And then when you speak that language and you sit in front of investors who are not specialized in your field and have no particular depth that is similar to yours, just because you studied the topic for years and they didn't. They are experts in something else. You don't speak the same language. These two words clash, and you really need to work on the transition just to become credible and to be taken seriously. And that transition wasn't particularly easy. I still remember it. I really needed to unlearn some like my style of explaining
Yeah.
things, and bring it to the high level where I summarize rather than go through the details, to basically show people the value of things, even if they did not have the right ability to understand the details because they did not research the topic.
Mm. Gosh, I so relate, because that's the same journey I went through, going from academia to media. Because if I was to continue my similar levels of communication in academia, I would lose my media audience, because it's just too much. Like, you're too in depth, you're too immersed, and you just bore people or lose people, even though it's really fascinating,
Yeah, but if you research this is like part of the human brain. If you know too much about something, when you talk about it, you're going to describe it that way.
Mm.
But that doesn't mean that the person in front of you who doesn't know as much would have the ability to absorb all of this information. So yeah, so it's not easy to unlearn these skills and learn new ones.
Right. It is important for engaging other people into STEM, isn't it? Because, I think that's what often puts girls off, is that subjects like math and physics, and even engineering, I mean, it just is so unreachable. Like, it just seems so intimidating and far, far out there, that girls just think, oh, do you know what? This is really not for me. So being able to communicate it is key to engaging more women into the fields.
Yeah, that is so true. I totally agree with that.
It sounds like you are extremely inspirational and, um, a great role model. Are you doing anything yourself to be able to sort of encourage more females into STEM?
Um, so I don't think I do enough. What I really try and do is focus as much as I can in the work that I do, because
Mm,
if it becomes successful, that on its own is the inspiration.
totally.
Proving
Yeah.
to women that this has been done, and this has been done regardless of the gender.
Mm,
Uh, and I wouldn't say I do a lot of activities around that. I would love to later down the line, but at the moment, I mean, I participated in a few campaigns around attracting more young people to engineering, but this was not a gender uh, focused campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've got your hands tied, because you're running a startup, and that's all consuming. And that's often the thing about women in STEM, is that they are so busy and so rushed off their feet, that it's difficult to try and get more women on board. But you know, did you, apart from your dad as being a role model, did you have any women in your corner sort of seeing you through your STEM career?
Um, so not that I remember many throughout throughout the like academic journey. But I guess now these days there are a few incredible women in the
Mm,
industry that they inspire me so much. They have developed a character that can cope with so many difficulties, and there's a lot to learn from there.
mm,
So it's women in the energy industry or in the engineering field.
mm. I must say, you do come across as being someone that's very confident, and certainly extremely capable. But have you ever had times where you've really doubted your abilities in STEM?
Yes, that is something that I think keeps you calibrating. Self doubt is not a negative thing as long as you don't let it take over your ability to think and act. But
Mm,
it's good to always question yourself if you're doing the best thing you can do with your time, with your
mm,
capabilities. If you make the right decision, or if you make mistakes, go back and try and fix them. If it affects people at work, apologize. Self doubt is not a bad it's not particularly a bad thing to have. It's but I always doubt myself. I cannot say every day, but very often.
oh, really? Yeah. I mean, it's kind of reassuring to know that you also have self-doubt because you sound like you're so successful and, you know, that you've never had a tough day in your career. But I'm sure, like all of us, that can't be the case. But how do you contain that self-doubt? Because I know personally that when self-doubt creeps up on me, sometimes I can get a bit overwhelmed with it and just think the whole world's going to stop spinning. And, you know, um, do you have any sort of like advice for just containing it?
Um, as long as it doesn't, you don't have it for a really long time. You doubt yourself. You think about things, and basically you make conclusions and act on them. I think that's when self doubt is good. If it takes really long time and it paralyzes you from making decisions, acting
Mm,
on them, that's when I think self doubt is a
mm,
negative thing, and balancing yourself, because that could affect your confidence, your capabilities to grow, to learn from mistake. Really, the purpose of doubt is to you'll understand that you'll always make mistakes, but when you doubt yourself, is like this is the processor in your brain working and checking if actually like you could fix the mistake that you make, or you could avoid making it
mm.
next time, or if it has impact on people, you just clarify, apologize, because that is very important for the continuation of your work and the continuation of your
Yeah, so
learning.
kind of use it as a tool. Yeah,
Yes.
it's the reason why I am sort of focusing on the self-doubt side of things is because it's probably responsible for the leaky pipeline. Because there is
Hmm.
very little evidence to suggest that girls and women are not capable in STEM subjects, yet they do drop out. And so often I just think it may be down to um, not believing that they are capable of doing the job well, and maybe just actual logistics where they are unable to have the life they want within STEM because it's just not geared up for women.
And also, if not everyone should be in STEM just because there is a need for that.
Mm,
But I think giving enough exposure that allow people to think about it fairly, rather than to make conclusions based on a difficult math teacher, or that not everyone have the ability to cope with, or a difficult math exam where you lose some people because they don't have they don't find it as challenging enough and interesting enough to keep doing it. Not everyone should be attracted to STEM, but I think it's really important to at least have enough exposure to make fair conclusions.
Right, because it sounds like you have always been driven by a problem that you wanted to solve. And so what came first was the passion to solve the problem rather than whether it's STEM or not STEM. And, it was more like the bigger picture first
Yes.
and then the steps you need to take to get there.
Yeah, and then STEM was the tool. I was always interested in learning more about how a bridge is standing together. How do you do you design a tower or something like that? I found these objects around us very fascinating. And that was very interesting for me to understand, like the how, and the how really came through like a STEM knowledge. But
Yeah.
yeah, not everyone would find the same interest, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that today, with the technology that we have, I mean, I did not grow up with an iPad and an iPhone. We did not have that when I was, but these are as well, like these are technology pieces that were designed by engineers, where everyone uses them, and I think it's fascinating to understand how they work and why they are how they are put together, how they work, how you run out of battery, for example, how you recharge it. I mean, all of these should be like a conversation that you talk about with could be a conversation that you talk about with your friends, and there is a lot of STEM in it, and it's not a dry math class.
Yeah. I mean, given everything you said, I must say that it seems like the question of gender is not really of utmost importance. What is important is passion and interest for the subject.
Yeah, and I really think that if we want to focus on STEM, we should say we need more STEM, and more STEM means it's inclusive. We need more STEM to be introduced to children since they are young, and then from there, that's the pipeline. Um, and not really like make it gender specific or a class of people specific. Just being aware that the drive and interest with people, like when they are very small, it, it's pretty much similar, even if we make it similar.
Yeah. I mean, you're a CEO of a company and you said that your colleagues are all male. Like, as a CEO, are you keen on having diversity and inclusivity, or is that not the main focus?
So when we hire, because we are not a big company, we're a small company, not a huge amount of resources, we hire the best person for the job. And in many jobs that we advertised for, we didn't have a single woman applying for them in the first place. So it wasn't even possible to hire a woman when there were like no women applying for the job. And I really hope that later down the line, when we grow a little bit bigger and we can have more the type of jobs that when we advertise them, we have more women applicants, that we will have more women in the company.
And again, we come across that issue where there are just no women available, but it's not necessarily about that. It's more about the right person for the right job. But I think, again, that does highlight that at the grassroots level, we do need to encourage more people to go into STEM. So yeah, it's completely consistent with your message. Or STEM.
Yeah. And if we were a large company, I would have done it differently because we would have resources and training programs to accept women for the job, even if they don't have all the qualifications, and train them. That takes time. It takes some resources. But some corporates who are profitable with large pockets, they can do that, and some are actually doing that, and this is really like one way of tackling this problem. Unfortunately, with startups, you work with limited budgets, you're too small to make decisions like that, and you really have to hire the best person for the job. And when you make decisions like that, gender is not really like the parameter that you usually look for. But I really hope that we can change that later down the line.
So apart from changing how STEM subjects are taught and how parents kind of nurture their kids into being interested in STEM, what can individuals do to explore STEM perhaps the way you did when you were a kid?
I mean, it's if you have, like, say, with my nephew or my friends' daughters and sons, I always play with them games that are associated with thinking about how you hold something, how it falls when you throw it, why that happens, and they like it. They engage very well with that. So I think that as an, I mean, I'm not their parent, but as a friend or a family member, you could always like have conversations with little kids that might spark someone's interest, and I think that is something that it could really change the interest level of a child in a topic or not, or make them more curious about something, and so on.
It's kind of sharing your passion for STEM with others, really, because it sounds like you have such a fascination with the world of STEM that you're able to pass that on. And that's precisely why we need more role models in the world like you.
Yeah, and also, I don't think many role models that I have, they're not women. They're and they're very supportive. They inspired me to do this. So that's why I think that the gender association might not be fully representative of my personal experience.
Right.
I had many supporters who were men. Just because they recognized that there aren't many women in this field, they wanted to support a woman. And that on its own, I think, is something that is worth us saying, that men are actually allies. And if we don't have role models that are women in a field, it's fine to look at men who wants to do things and see them as the role model.
So on that note then, how are you finding the compatibility of being in traditionally male-dominated fields and wanting to maintain your kind of womanhood, perhaps in terms of, relationships, having a family, those kinds of very like deeply feminine things?
It's a possible balance. Many others have done it before, and it's a possible balance, and it really depends on your choices of who your friends are, who you partner with. You'd only choose to your circle based on what you want to do. And Some others have definitely done it. I'm not the first or the last woman in this field. There are many others who have families, have children, if they want to have children. Some have, I know a CEO of a really large utility company who have 5 children.
Gosh.
And she had her entire career. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's definitely, yeah, you see some others do it.
Yeah. Well, I must say, in talking to you, I just feel like nothing could hold you back. And it's really all about the attitudes we choose to have as individuals as to whether we're successful or not. And knowing your background, I know my audience has no clue because we keep this podcast anonymous, but knowing your background and your accomplishments, it really seems like your perspectives on life and your attitude towards what you do has allowed you to succeed. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us today on Scilence.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's it from my STEM guest this week. Gosh, what an unstoppable woman. Nothing holds this guest back. And I must say, it's really inspiring listening to her, because I realize that whenever I sort of moan and groan about how difficult life is, I just think, hold on a minute, it's my choice to see it that way. And I always have a different option. Thank you so much for listening this week. Don't forget to rate and review the show, and catch you next week on Scilence.